Oh, Judge Stevens, hi! Fletcher Reed, I'm scheduled to be in your court in half an hour.
He's one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. A man whose physical comedy created a whole new language of laughter, completely dominating the box office and defining a generation of movies. Jim Carrey, the pet detective, the man in The Mask, built an empire by making the world smile. To everyone, he was the lovable goofball who had it all: fame, fortune, and millions of fans. But behind the curtain of his massive success, a much darker story was unfolding. This story wasn't told in box office numbers, but in quiet breakups and messy tabloid headlines. It's a story of repeated heartbreak, of two marriages that began with hope and ended in disillusionment, leaving everyone asking one simple question: why did Jim Carrey's marriages fall apart? The answer is a lot more complicated and tragic than you might think. It's a story not just about divorce, but about a man battling his own mind. A man for whom the blinding spotlight of fame became both a blessing and a curse, ultimately making a quiet, stable love life feel like an impossible dream. To get the man, you have to understand the boy. Long before the bright lights of Hollywood, James Eugene Carrey was a kid in Ontario, Canada, growing up in a home that was full of love but shadowed by hardship. His father, Percy, was a talented saxophone player with big dreams, but he took a safe job as an accountant to support his family. His mother, Kathleen, struggled with chronic illness and hypochondria and was often stuck in bed. It was in this environment that young Jim found his calling. Being funny wasn't just a hobby, it was a necessity. He became the family entertainer, doing anything to get a smile out of his mother. He'd throw himself downstairs, twist his face into wild impressions, anything to lighten the mood in his home. Comedy wasn't a choice. It was a coping mechanism. It was his shield. That fragile world shattered when Carrey was a teenager. His dad lost the accounting job and the family was thrown into poverty. One day, they were lower middle class, and the next they were homeless, living out of a VW van. To survive, the entire family, including young Jim, got jobs as janitors and security guards at a tire factory. The once straight-A student was now working brutal 8-hour shifts right after school. A soul-crushing routine that filled him with a rage he couldn't process. He grew quiet and withdrawn at school, eventually dropping out on his 16th birthday to help his family and chase his comedy dream. Those years of poverty and desperation carved deep grooves into his mind. He learned a lesson that would define the rest of his life. Desperation is a necessary ingredient to learning anything or creating anything. Period. If you ain't desperate at some point, you ain't interesting. That desperation fueled his ambition. He moved to Los Angeles, working his craft in comedy clubs, all driven by a burning need to escape the poverty that had haunted him. And it was during this time of struggle and striving that he met his first wife, a woman who knew him long before. The rest of the world did. In the early 1980s, Jim Carrey was just another broke comedian trying to make it at the Comedy Store in Los Angeles, sometimes making as little as $25 a night. Working there as a waitress was an aspiring actress named Melissa Wimmer. She saw past the unknown comic and spotted the incredible talent hiding underneath. They fell in love, got married in March 1987, and had their daughter Jane later that year. For a little while, they had a normal life. Melissa worked 2 jobs to support the family while Jim hit the pavement, a partnership built on belief and sacrifice. Then, 1994 happened. In one explosive year, Jim Carrey went from being a recognizable face on In Living Color to a full-blown global superstar. Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber all came out, making him a box office giant. The money problems were gone, but a new, heavier pressure took their place. The foundation of their marriage began to crack under the weight of his new reality. Carrey admitted the change was impossible to handle. He'd come home from being the center of the universe on a movie set, a feeling he called walking on the moon, and couldn't reconnect with the normal realities of family life. The dynamic had completely changed. Melissa, trying to keep their family grounded, gave him an ultimatum. She told Rolling Stone, "You must come home and put your feet back on the ground and take your garbage out like everyone else, or I can't be married to you." In her words, basically he called my bluff. The marriage couldn't survive that kind of earthquake. The divorce, finalized in 1995, was messy. There were arguments over the exact date they separated, a key detail since Carrey had signed a multi-million-dollar contract for The Mask in that window. That, their love, born out of hardship and anonymity, just wasn't built for the hurricane of superstardom. Melissa Wimmer was the first casualty of Jim Carrey's fame, sadly concluding that he just wasn't good husband material because marriage required an empathy that was being swallowed whole by his career. As his first marriage was falling apart, Jim Carrey was on the set of Dumb and Dumber, where he met his co-star, Lauren Holly. The chemistry they had on screen quickly spilled into real life, but the timing was a disaster. Carrey was still legally married, and the new romance immediately put Holly in the media's crosshairs. She was branded a homewrecker, a label she has always denied. Holly insisted they only got together after he had separated from Wimmer, but in the court of public opinion, the damage was done. Their relationship was born in scandal and lived under a microscope. They got married in September 1996, but the privacy they needed was non-existent. If his first marriage was destroyed by the arrival of fame, his second was consumed by it from day one. Holly described the horrifying reality of their life, telling Oprah Winfrey how they found paparazzi living under their tennis court just to get photos of them inside their own home. There was simply no escape. This intense pressure was corrosive. The constant scrutiny and whispers created an environment where a new marriage couldn't possibly survive. After less than a year, it was over. In July 1997, Holly filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Looking back, Holly has spoken about the heartbreak of that time, not just from the failed marriage, but from the public story she couldn't control. The joy and laughter she shared with Carrey were real, but they were smothered by the external pressures. His high-energy personality, the very thing that made him a genius, was a chaotic force to live with. She wanted stability, while he thrived on chaos, a fundamental mismatch that fame only made worse. The experience seemed to teach Carrey a hard lesson, and he later told a reporter that the moment you think you've found your forever person, the universe will prove you wrong. To really understand why Jim Carrey's 2 marriages and other long-term relationships have consistently failed, we have to look past the women and the pressures of fame. We have to look inward, at the deep and persistent battle Carrey has waged with his own mind. The real reason lies in a lifelong struggle with depression and a fractured sense of self. Carrey has been incredibly open about his fight with depression, a shadow that's followed him since his tough childhood. He once said his humor was born from it as a desperate try to make his sick mother feel better. For years he took Prozac, but eventually stopped, realizing it wasn't fixing the root problem. His depression was deeply tied to the very fame he'd fought so hard for. He's talked about how depression can be the result of playing a character for too long. In a moment of incredible insight, he said, "Depression is your body saying, FKU, I don't want to be this character anymore. This avatar you've created in the world is too much for me." He explained that he'd get depressed when he tried to go back to being Jim Carrey. And that's the heart of it. The world fell in love with a persona, the zany, endlessly energetic, funny man. But keeping that mask on was exhausting and spiritually draining. The man behind it was often lost, tired, and profoundly sad. Imagine being married to that. Imagine living with a man who feels forced to perform, but is being crushed by the performance. His first wife, Melissa Wimmer, called him an extremely depressive person. A source close to his later relationship with Jenny McCarthy said, "He can run hot and he can run cold. He is someone who desperately needs to be with someone, then just as desperately needs to be alone." Carrey himself admitted it, once saying, "I'm a hard guy to live with. I'm like a caged animal. I'm up all night walking around the living room. It's hard for me to come down from what I do." He famously said, "I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that it's not the answer." He reached the top only to find it was hollow. This disillusionment sent him on a journey into spirituality, painting, and deep introspection. A journey that is often a solitary one. In that context, a traditional partnership becomes a secondary concern to the primary battle for his own soul. His partners weren't just marrying a man, they were marrying his fame, his persona, and the profound depression that came with it all. It was a package deal that proved time and again to be too heavy for any one relationship to carry. The patterns from his two marriages continued in his later high-profile relationships. After a brief but intense engagement to his Me, Myself, and Irene co-star Renee Zellweger, his next major public relationship was with actress and model Jenny McCarthy. From 2005 to 2010, Jim and Jenny were one of Hollywood's most visible couples. They were funny, outspoken, and Carrey became a major father figure to McCarthy's son, Evan. But they never married, with Carrey once joking that they would never get married, but they would also never get divorced. This hinted at the scars from his past. When they finally announced their split in 2010, sources pointed to familiar problems, clashing personalities, and Carrey's ongoing depression. The breakup got messy when McCarthy later publicly claimed that Carrey had cut off contact with her son, leaving the boy in therapy to deal with the feeling of abandonment. That chapter, however, would be overshadowed by the profound tragedy of his next relationship. In 2012, Carrey started an on-and-off relationship with an Irish makeup artist named Cathriona White. Their romance was described as a roller coaster. Friends said she was madly in love with Jim, but also that she tied her entire identity to his, feeling lost whenever he pulled away. The relationship ended in the most devastating way possible. In September 2015, just days after their final breakup, Cathriona White took her own life. She left behind a note that, according to reports, was addressed to Carrey and read in part, "I'm sorry you felt I wasn't there for you. I tried to give you my best part. I'm just not for this world." The tragedy plunged Carrey into a dark new chapter. He was hit with a wrongful death lawsuit from White's estranged husband and her mother, who accused him of illegally giving her the prescription drugs she used to overdose. The legal battle was ugly and public. Carrey fiercely denied the allegations, filing a countersuit that called the lawsuit a shameless attempt to exploit him. In the end, the lawsuits against him were dismissed in January 2018, but it was a hollow victory. He had served as a pallbearer at her funeral in Ireland, his face etched with grief. In a statement, he called her a truly kind and delicate Irish flower, too sensitive for this soil. The tragic end of his relationship with Cathriona White stands as the ultimate heartbreaking example of the destructive forces at play in his life, laying bare the immense toll his relationships took, not just on him, but on the women who loved him. If you found this look into the complex life of Jim Carrey compelling and want more stories that go beyond the headlines, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. So why did Jim Carrey's marriages end? The answer isn't simple. It's not that he was a bad person or that his partners were wrong for him. It's the story of an unavoidable collision between two powerful forces. A man's internal, lifelong battle with depression, and the external, all-consuming pressure of fame. His first marriage to Melissa Wummer was a casualty of his rocket ride to the top. His second, to Lauren Holly, was born and suffocated inside the Hollywood media machine. His later relationships followed a similar tragic pattern, all strained by the difficulty of building a real connection in the shadow of the Jim Carrey persona, an avatar he himself grew to hate. At his core, Carrey is a man who used comedy as a shield against childhood trauma. He chased fame with everything he had, hoping it would solve his problems, only to find it made them worse. The very manic energy that he used to build his career was tied to a deep sadness that made a quiet, stable partnership almost impossible. The divorces and the breakups weren't the disease. They were the symptoms of a man wrestling with demons far more powerful than any tabloid could ever capture. They were the inevitable collateral damage in the life of a comedic genius who, for so long, was just desperately trying to save himself.